with the intent to post the meeting. Microphones. And your inside voice, John.
What?
And so we are recording, so obviously Liz can edit the front end of this off.
We haven't technically called to order. Yeah, depends on if we give her anything good for like YouTube or something. Right?
But we are not. But we are not live. So we'll call the meeting to order at 6:32 on Monday evening, and all rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, again, I want to welcome you. This is a special meeting, council meeting called by myself, the mayor. And on the agenda tonight is our discussion concerning our ambulance service. And so we had some specific deadlines, which staff has alerted me and the council. And so we need to have discussion tonight and then decide if we're going to go to a motion for the resolution. So Forrest, anything you want to kick off the discussion? And if your people are listening online, we'll have a link to what's available, the information available on our city page as well.
Okay, where do I start with this? So you have a memorandum in your packet this evening regarding a number of items, potential tax levy versus the ambulance district versus no action. I think I hear fuzziness in this just when I'm talking, but anyway. So as you know, we've been having some discussions regarding some alternatives to funding our ambulance service. And when we did the supplemental budget this year, we changed the amount of subsidy from the general fund to about $744,000, which is not a long-term sustainable activity for the city. We've got some basic information about what the ambulance service does, provided by Chief Farron. There were 1,360 ambulance calls in this last year. 713 were city calls and 352 were rural calls outside of the city limits. Also 250 transfers, 17 responses to fires, and 28 calls classified as information and other. The primary issue is that in that period, the ambulance paid $1.1 million and collected $435,000. And that's not based on a failure of the ambulance service to collect payments, but primarily on the payment rate that they receive. I think it's important to note that the cost of providing these services has increased substantially in the last decade. And that goes to all the different costs of providing it, not only materials for the services, but the cost of employees, which have escalated, based on things like PERS rates and our liability insurance rates and all the benefits we provide to employees, which we rightfully should provide. However, in that same time period, the amount that we're reimbursed for calls has not escalated substantially in any kind of way. We all remember the COVID inflation, 8% and then 8%, and then, now it's dropped back down, so it's only 3% on top of those. So our costs have increased substantially, but those insurance rates haven't. So what we looked at is a number of different options. The resolution that you have this evening would be for a tax levy. But we have two things going on with that. One is we have an ambulance service area, much of which is outside the city limits, and tax levy that's contemplated in the resolution, OT 2025, is only on the residents of Coke Hill. So essentially that's saying about 25% of the calls which occur outside of the city would be subsidized by the the citizens of Coke Hill, which I think is, my opinion on this, the council could differ with that, is kind of a non-starter. I think for the voters, it's a difficult pill to swallow. So it makes the levy kind of a perilous idea. What we then pivoted to from that idea was an ambulance district. Now, the ambulance district would encompass the entire service area, the current ASA. That's a longer process. So, you know, you take that to the county, if you will, and you work with them, and, you know, they can approve the formation of a district, but because it needs to be funded, it's really got to go to the voters. The earliest that we could probably put that together and get it in front of the voters would be May of next year, not May of this year. If you did pass this resolution right, and the timing of us having that discussion is, this is about the latest date you could pass that resolution and still get it on the ballot this year. It'd have to be there on the 28th, the end of this week. So if we explore the district idea, there's quite a few moving parts on that we're still working on, but it is a possibility. So that is a possibility. We also looked at could the URA provide funding in the interim to the city in, say, the form of a loan or investment, and we have a solid legal opinion that that is not possible. The URA, being a taxing district, has a very specific purpose, so it cannot lend the city money for that kind of activity. I mean, basically, the purpose of the URA is capital projects, and that's not a capital project. So the other thing that's included in my memo is if the council so directs, we can look at private, if you will, bank financing or lender financing to carry the costs for next fiscal year. But right now, the ambulance service is funded through July 1st of this year, and we do not anticipate in the budget process that we can substantially cover the amount of money that we are this year. So, you know, we knew that we were going to have some issues with the ambulance service. It just came up a year sooner than we had anticipated due to the budgetary constraints we have. So it's really up to the council to give staff some direction on how you'd like to proceed, what you'd like us to look at.
And just so our councilors are aware, if we decide to go to a motion for the resolution, that has to be tonight. There is a hard deadline, the end of this week, for our staff to follow through on that. If we do come to a motion, vote, and approve the resolution. Equally, if we can't get to that because there's a consensus, we agree with Mr. Nordberg's estimation, equally, it would be really important for our staff to have some clue or direction from us on, because it's kind of a, okay, what are we going to do? Have a looming June, July deadline as well. And so, so we're in a tough spot for sure.
How long is the levy for? 5 years. 5 years?
Yes.
Okay. Because there's no way to do it shorter. That's just the term of it, right? Like, is that something we could make it 1/5 of what we're asking to cover the 1 year to bridge the gap until we got to the district? Or year and a half, 2 years? Like, something a little bit more palatable to where we're not necessarily doing it for the full 5 years?
Yeah, Councilor, we could do that. I guess my read from recent levy opportunities in the city, the county, the community, I think it adds some complexity to the messaging we'd have to create between now and May. You know, I would say that discussions that I've had with a few community members is, you know, people are not very, coming on the heels of the county's field initiatives, I think it's a really a real long shot, a real tough row to hoe to even try to explain that to people.
And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, for what I was reading through here is that we're legally not allowed to charge for or go the route that private entities are allowed to go as far as reimbursement, or is that a preference? Like, is there possibly, like, private, I think base city ambulance is like a couple $100 or like $250 for every lift assist. Like, it sucks, but that's what they're facing anyways, because base city ambulance or Myrtle Point is going to be who gets contracted for this area if our ambulance goes away. So, like, how much would we recoup of what we lost if we start charging fees for certain calls? I mean, it could be, they're going to pay them no matter what, but it would be nice to have our ambulance that's within response time versus base cities. Even though they got a contract here, they're probably going to be sitting at Bunker Hill at the gas station waiting for the next call. I mean, Bandon has an office there, and their ambulance is sitting at Bunker Hill. It's not anything against the company. It just makes sense for them that they can go in every direction. And then if something else happens, because they got a contract in Bandon, there's a crash in Bunker Hill, there's a crash in Bandon, now there's no ambulance for Coquille. But if we have a Coquille ambulance, it services our people. So, like, it's worth the premium. And the way I look at it is, like, we have this issue. We just lay it out there, like, either we fund it or it's gone, and you're dealing with the alternative. And I think that if we have that message, I think that we would get a lot more support. I understand the non-starter aspect of what you're talking about, but, I mean, if we argued why it would be beneficial to go with the alternative, I think that's a non-starter at the same time. So, I mean, it's all about the approach. I think we show, if we don't do this, this is the reality, and yeah, it sucks, but this is the cost. Which one do you want? Do you want to keep the services and keep, because there's going to be a lot of elderly around here that are going to lose their house. If it goes private, they're going to get their lift assist 40 times, 50 times a year. They're going to start getting liens on their house. They're going to get liens on their cars. Like, it's, the reality of the matter is it's going to affect our community extremely, like, more than just convenience. Like, our community is a lot of retired people, and they're screwed. Like, I would say probably 30 to 40% of our population here is, like, either at that point or knocking on that door. And, I mean, we might charge that fee, but we're not going to go the other route of putting a lien against their house. So, I mean, is there some sort of, like, middle ground we can do where we recoup some of that loss that we're getting? Like, push as hard as we can within our legal rights? Because I really think that a lot of our citizens are going to have to move, is what the reality comes down to. It's not going to be in their best interest to not have Coquille ambulance, and if Bay City's ambulance is coming in, they're going to lose everything. They might as well sell it and go somewhere else. So, unfortunately.
So Farron wants to answer.
So as far as increasing numbers, I've had a couple of talks here recently with knowledgeable people on this. You can bill whatever you're going to bill, but Medicare and Medicaid are going to pay what they're going to pay. That's plain and simple. That's why we have so many write-offs, is because they're going to pay what they're going to pay, and it just, whether you bill $100 or $1,000 or $5,000, you're still only getting like $280 for that transport. So yeah, we could potentially increase in hopes that we get a little bit more from the people who actually have insurance, but at the same time, we're still, those numbers are a very small demographic of what we have. The the large majority of what we have in our demographics is Medicare and Medicaid patients. So that's where transfers are important to us, because we're not seeing the people with Blue Cross Blue Shield insurance with 911 calls, because they're like, I'm not paying the difference. I'm going to drive myself to the hospital. So we're more likely to see those patients whenever the doctor's like, no, you can't leave this ER. We're going to send you to Eugene or Portland. So that's where the ambulances make most of their money, is in the transfers, and we take as many of those transfers as humanly possible to try and make up that money. The lift assistance stuff, we are billing for those. We're billing not $250, but we're billing $100 every time we go out and do a lift assist. So, but again, that comes down to reimbursement, and insurance doesn't pay for lift assist, so then that cost goes on the person, and then sending them to collections or however we have to do that, like so hopefully that helps with the thought process a little bit.
It does, and I'm just thinking, like, as far as, I think this kind of sells itself if you are just super upfront and real about everything, and just like plain open book communication on it. Is this is the financial thing stemming from something prior to anybody here? It was an error, most likely, that went unchecked for years, snowball effect, and now we're dealing with the consequences. The ambulance has never been making a profit. It's always been kind of like the pool. It's a service that's provided and it's budgeted, and now we can't do that. So it's coming to a head. That was going to have to be addressed anyways, and now it's expedited. But, I mean, plain and simple, our response time for our guys right now, we're really lucky. I mean, my dad's alive right now because they were that close. My dad would be dead right now, and there's going to be a lot more dead citizens in Coquille if we're contracted through Bay City's ambulance. Like, let's be real. And let's not sugarcoat anything. And yeah, I'm against taxes raising in most ways. Like, I hate taxes in general, but at the same time, for essential things, like, I'm willing to pony up and pay it for my dad and for the people in the community that I care about. A lot of people are gonna die based on their response times. You're gonna be looking, instead of 3 minutes, you're gonna be looking 30 minutes. And everybody's gonna be driving themselves there to try and have a chance. Mid-heart attack trying to make it, now you got somebody crashing on their way to the hospital because we don't have an ambulance. I mean, this is gonna be a shit show. Like, let's not sugarcoat anything. Like, we just need to call it as it is.
So, I mean, we're up against it. I mean, I think even more just the rising costs, insurance isn't paying. I mean, I guess even maybe the burning question behind the urgency of where we're at is, I mean, can we even be viable even into the future? I mean, even if we pass a 5-year levy, I mean, how are we going to survive 5 years after that? And so, you know, and that is, you know, and thank God we have a good hospital in town. I mean, that's probably the one thing that'll save us. And it may be to the detriment of a levy, because you'll have a whole demographic of people, well, I can drive myself to the hospital. We got one right here in our community. And so it isn't until you know that you need it, or in a case like what John described for his dad, that now, oh man, I wish I had an ambulance service. And so I don't even know what the answer is. I mean, I am one of those taxpayers that asked the question early on in this process. So we're going to ask the city of Coquille to subsidize an entire 400 square mile service area. And it doesn't matter what the language is. I mean, even the county tried to do it. Okay, if we don't get this, then you're not going to have this. But the voters made it clear. And so, I mean, scare tactics and just simple truth, it still isn't going to work either, because we're in a current climate right now with inflation and the unknowns, and globally and nationally, where people are, gun shy about taxes, and so.
I don't think scare tactics is appropriate, like, as far as the description of this. It's reality.
No, I know.
Like, we're not doing any scare tactics. Like, who in this community do you care about that isn't going to survive when they have a heart attack or whatever else happens, or a lift assist within time? And, like, your aunts, your uncles, your grandparents, the people that babysit you in town, like, I know 500 people that I'm worried about. And
Yeah.
I think you just tell the reality and let it sell itself.
Unfortunately, with the demographics that we do have here, with over half being above 55, right? This is just a hard truth reality. Which I understand, like, it can come off scary and people are going to label that as scare tactics when it's just the truth. But I think that, so, like, if this is passed as is, right now we would be asking for them to also cover rural areas that are outside of city of Coquille. Do we know do we have an option to dial it back? I mean, I wouldn't love that either, but, like, would we have an option to dial it back to just the city limits?
As far as the service provided, the service area?
Yeah.
So it's my belief that if you were to attempt to dial it back to just the city limits, and that the other entities may look at that as, oh, they can't cover their own ASA, so why don't we just take over that ASA? We can provide the service that they're unable to provide. Does that make sense? So
I think there's a part that I'm not understanding then, is because, like, so if that's a look, like, say Myrtle Point wants to cover that area,
Sure.
the rural at least, then, okay, at least that area is getting covered, and didn't they actually get an ambulance levy passed?
So they already had a taxing district established. Myrtle Point already had a taxing district established, and it is a medical taxing district, I think, is the term for it. So they did get a levy to increase that this last year. I think if anybody were to get it, fire and ambulance would be the ones to get a levy to pass. Kind of my hesitation with this is only asking the citizens of Coquille to cover the costs for everybody. If we cut that district back to say, hey, we're just going to cover in the city limits, this has to go to the ASA committee and also to the county commissioners who say, well, they can't provide this service in this area. Why don't we just give this service to somebody else anyways? And then we're same scenario of delayed responses. I could have the fire chief of Bandon come over here and explain how long they're waiting for
services. Or it's unlikely for them just to change boundaries.
It happens every probably 10 to 15 years where there's a couple of houses that change a little bit in the boundaries just based on communications and response times and everything. But to just reduce the boundary to city limits, I don't know that is the right option, because then those other two entities could potentially say, yeah, we'll do the whole thing, like, no problem.
Yeah, they'll paint a rosy picture that's not actually reality.
Correct.
Plus, you lose that revenue. I mean, there's a legitimate outside city limits revenue stream, so it's a domino effect. Even though we might dial it back, there's still that lost revenue, so it might be more than $775,000 we need because we lost 20% revenue that's outside our city. So.
Well, I can understand that, but at the same time, if you're only losing 38 cents per dollar and you don't have the costs associated with that, we're getting 38 cents, or about 38% of everything is being paid, right? So that equates to 38 cents per dollar is what we're receiving, and our cost is way above that. considering something like that might actually be more fiscally appropriate because you're stopping the 72 cents on the dollar loss, or maybe even greater because there's greater mileage, all of that type of stuff, that it,
No, I'm not sure, Counselor, Chief Fair and I have talked about this quite a bit, and one of the issues is, okay, the transfers probably stay the same. We lose the robocalls, which you do lose the billing on that, but it doesn't really change our manpower needs for operating the ambulance service. Am I correct on that?
I would agree with that. I mean, the call volume continues to increase. Yeah, we may see some reduction in call volume, but one of the big reasons we elected to go to 4 shifts instead of 3 shifts was the amount of overtime that we were paying for those second out calls and everything else. So it was becoming enough overtime because there would be a first out call and a second out call, and the shifts, they were getting overtime for just their normal shifts.
Right.
Based on FMLSA, that's the right one, and state statutes that say if a firefighter works over 53 hours in a week, they get overtime for it. So we tried to, if you're paying the overtime for a regular shift, and now that person's coming in to handle a second out call, so we have an ambulance responding, it doesn't reduce how many people we need to make sure that ambulance is operational, if that makes sense.
yeah, no, that does. I mean, because your fixed costs are going to remain your fixed costs, right? Like, it's more of like the mileage, the wear and the tear, additional time because, you might have to go 15, 20 miles out in order to get to the, that house that you need to get to. Like, so those would be more of your flexible costs that would be, impacted on it. That, I would bet is higher than 38% of what we're actually receiving.
So with how many miles we're putting on the ambulance, like right now, we probably need to replace an ambulance every 5 years. Is that happening? No. We've done pretty good at getting a couple of them replaced recently because the other ones were getting to the point where they could not continue. I mean, they were causing increased costs and repairs and everything else.
Yeah, absolutely.
The ones we've got right now are doing pretty good, but they're also getting a lot of miles on them. Yes, you're correct on that. But, hang on, let me focus. But I don't feel like those costs are why the ambulance is struggling. I believe
No, I
that
completely
it's
agree
the
with that.
personnel costs. The cost of personnel is always your biggest cost in any business.
Absolutely.
And not getting paid.
Well,
and not
the
getting
issue
paid.
really is insurance.
I mean, if
It's-
you were getting paid, we wouldn't even be meeting tonight.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, because that really is the issue. It is 100% insurance. And this is the model of every insurance company, and that they're going to negotiate it down and make it seem like they save you a ton of money while we're the ones who have to take, the hit. And then if you have private insurance, you're now paying twice because now you're paying a premium for having private insurance in order to make up for the fact that, Medicare and OHP pay a fraction of what the true cost to even be survivable is. And to be clear, I would not want to really see, I wouldn't want to see a reduction in anybody getting services. I think that's really important. It's something I've always been passionate about for our community because lives do matter, exactly as John was talking about, and we have a significant portion of our population that is in these services, or accidents happen and you might need that response time. I'm not comfortable with it being a 30-minute wait for anybody. Like, if you're calling an ambulance, it's unlikely that you have 30 minutes to wait.
I'm going to go ahead and say this. It's not just ambulance that's going to be affected.
Right.
It's also going to be fire response as well, because if we don't have the career staff there, then we are depending on all volunteer staff at that point, and the fire response is going to be slower. It's going to be more challenging. Right now, we're getting, with this auto aid we're doing, it's been fantastic because a lot of times I have more people than I know what to do with. And we're potentially going to go back to, hey, our closest next engine is Myrtle Point, when right now we've got enough staff and enough people around that I've got 2 engines coming to pretty much any working structure fire, or an engine in a rescue with personnel on it. And that's going to slow down the next apparatus coming in, and there's only so many things you can do with 2 people. General rule of thumb on all fires is 2 in, 2 out. So I've got to have 4 people minimum to be able to even make entry on a fire. So if you've got people inside and it's more than incipient stage, we can't go in unless we have personnel. So the whole ambulance thing doesn't just affect the ambulance, it affects the whole funding of the ambulance, doesn't just affect the ambulance, it affects the fire as well.
Absolutely.
I mean, I don't want to decrease anything either. I'm just, the reality is we don't have money. And so we thought we had more time until we figured out, oh, we got a budget issue and we had to approve a different budget, supplemental budget. And now we're faced with a shortage we just can't keep supporting. So I'm worried that even if we pass this levy, we're not even including the cost of equipment. We're not including the cost of inflation. We're not even including the costs of rising costs in that. So we could be 3 years into this levy and we're like, oh shoot, we still can't afford this service because, as Forrest said in a memo to all of us, 75% of all cities in the state of Oregon are not going to, they don't have enough funding. They don't have enough income. And so insurance companies are not going to suddenly start magically paying. And so I hear what we're saying. We don't want to decrease services, but I think for me, I want to communicate what's our plan. If it's the plan is the 5-year levy to buy us time, then how do we plan for, is it a different way we staff? Is it a different, how do we make up a shortfall?
Can't we do the levy under the guide that we're going to go for the rural ambulance district, and like this is the only way we can fill that time gap, and it will still be applied, like even after it becomes the district, it will just go towards that. Like I feel like that's the future ahead of us, to have a larger tax base to where everybody that's getting services paying for it. Like,
Absolutely.
and so like, once again, just show our cards face up and be like, this is the reality. Do you want this, or do you want to keep it the way it was? I mean, I find it very similar to when I ran for this position. There was an argument that we get rid of the police department and we contract with county, with the sheriff's office. The sheriff's office wanted it. Yeah, heck yeah, we'll take more funding, we'll get more positions. But they were going to log time sitting at the office as their hours here. They weren't going to be a force that is respondent to our citizens. So we have Coquille PD that focuses on our issues and our calls.
Yep.
Like, if we contract, basically Bay Cities is going to be the equivalent of county. Like, county was going to have an extra man in Charleston dealing with their high volume of calls, and when something popped off here, they were going to make their way here. But by the time it's there, everyone's already shot and bleeding out, like, or stabbed and bled out by that time, because like there wasn't somebody specifically here to deal with it. And kind of same thing with our ambulance versus their ambulance. By the time our ambulance gets here, it's going to be, they're not going to need to do a transport. It's going to be deceased on scene. Okay, it's somebody else's thing to deal with. Like,
So, Chief Farron, remind me, how many employees are full-time for both?
Under the ambulance?
Yeah,
or
so,
under ambulance and fire. So there's myself, there's Renee who does the billing, and she also runs ambulance calls. There are 4 paramedics, and then Kenny, who does fire code and municipal code, and then Zach, who's doing a lot of coverage, maintenance on the apparatus. Part of bringing him on was to reduce how many mechanical costs we're having by sending the apparatus out to the mechanic, and I think that that has been hugely beneficial in that aspect. So I think 8 total.
8?
8 or 9.
How many, you said, so 8 total?
Yeah.
How many EMT trained volunteers and or staff?
Off the top of my head, I believe we have about 8 to 10 part-time personnel that we're pulling from.
I think that's really impressive. You know, you guys, I mean, look at all that you guys have managed with 8 paid employees and then 8 to 10 part-time and volunteer, right? Because, I mean, it's, how many square miles do you service?
It's 400 square miles is what the ambulance district is. So we go far end of Finley Loop. We go clear out Fairview and up Burnt Mountain. We go Lampa Lane, all the way to Lampa Lane on 42S, and then we go to just past the Colito Bridge towards Coos Bay. So that's our ambulance district, roughly. So we have quite the area to cover, and then there's constantly transfers, and being able to keep up on everything is definitely challenging at times when people still need time off and days off. And
The other issue I can think of is you lose those positions, you lose the core that of knowledge and training, and like a lot of people volunteered knowing that they don't have to be the only person to make that decision. They're helping. You lose that core, and I mean, we're probably going to lose some volunteers just because they're not going to be willing to take on the total responsibility. And not to mention, a lot of people are there because of certain people in the department. I don't know. I don't know. That's going to be tough to lose that core group, and then try and just run primarily off of volunteers. I mean, how many actual employees would we have if it's just fire?
if it's just fire and all of the part-time people leave, maybe 10 total.
So
Going down from 35 or so. Like,
you're going to have more police running hoses on fires like we've done in the past?
I got 2 of them so far. I'm working on the chief too.
I mean, and that's the reality we face, because even if we decide to put the levy to the voters, I mean, that's what we face. The only other option on the table is if we're gonna wanna go out for debt,
Right.
buy time.
Right, and I do want to point out on the levy, I'm not disagreeing with anything the council's saying. I totally get the impact there. The impact on the taxpayer, the average homeowner, assessed value of $151,800, is almost $400 per year in additional taxes. There's another issue that we're trying to understand right now, which is compression. And, I've had some discussions with people about that. We haven't quite figured out how compression plays into what the yield is. I honestly don't know that, and I've been trying to dig into it.
I don't think I'm familiar with that. Can you tell me what the
Yeah.
compression is?
Yeah. So there's, because of the legislation in Oregon, and I got a beautiful 84-page booklet on it right now, there's X number of districts. We've got a hospital district, we've got a school district, we've got the URA district, and whatever else shows up on your tax bill, but there's a cap in the total amount of levied taxes. So there is some compression, which means, like, I will say when I was talking to an administrator from another district, oh, you guys are going to do it in a district, man, then we're going to get less money, because everybody gets, it's kind of like the same
They
pot.
divvy it up.
Yeah, so I'm not sure exactly what the effective yield would be from our district. I've had people say different things, and I'm trying to figure out exactly what that means.
That's if we go to a taxing district, but if we do the citizens of Coquille, that money comes straight to.
Yes, because that is an imposed levy that says the taxes in Coquille can be higher.
Yeah, because even the taxing district, we still have to get the approval of the commissioners, work with them on that, figure out this compression, and then, didn't you say some of the conversation you're having with the League of Oregon Cities is you could do all that work and then find out you're still not going to be funded?
Right, or you'll have much less funding than you thought.
I think if you just talk pure numbers, the average cost of $400 a year is cheaper than 2 lift assists by Bay Cities.
However, I will advocate, if we say we have a predominantly aging community who's on fixed income, $400 a year is nothing to sneeze at, and my mom, who's on fixed income, rents, and landowners have to increase their rate, and so it's a tough spot. And I'm not saying, I'm not trying to put a value on a life, no way, all of us get it. I don't want to see any of this go. I don't want to see us decrease whatsoever. It's tough.
I mean, that fixed income, you budget that $400 or you prepare your budget to lose your house. I mean, the people that need it, I mean, that 40% population, and then you sell it to the rest of the people, hey, who's going to have to pay the bill for your mom or your aunt or your grandpa? Like, you're not going to let them lose their house, so you're going to pony up and pay it. Well, you might as well pay to have the service nearby and maybe keep them alive, too.
You don't have to convince me, I'm just.
Well, I mean, this is being recorded for the public. I mean,
Send the voters over the last 10 years of taxes, I mean, they have not been supportive. You don't have to convince me.
well,
I think that's
they
the
have-
reality, though, is if they're not supportive, we have our answer, which would be unfortunate.
Well, yeah, it's
And I-
on their hands, but
Yeah, and I wouldn't agree with that, but turning it over and allowing them to choose and being transparent with, this is just where we're at, which would you like to have something local or would you not?
I think the difference here is all the other votes that have failed, the people have not been happy with the product they're getting. Everybody in Coquille is pretty happy with the service they're getting. That's a huge advantage. That's a huge selling point. We got a good thing here. Let's keep it together. Let's fund it.
It's the main one, man. Our community loves our fire name.
I mean, but the schools, like, people are upset about where funding's going at the schools. People are upset about the sheriff's office. I worked there, as much as I love all those guys, like, it is what it is. Like, I understand, like, everybody's hands are tied over there, but what you get now versus what the alternative is, we actually have something to sell here. And like I said before, I think it sells itself. Like, if you can't sell a bad product and hope that it passes. But we're selling a good product with the understanding of it's in your hands. Like, it's up to the voters. Do we keep the good thing we have, or do we go with the alternative? I think it's a good message. I really do. I think it's going to be a pretty easy one for us to motivate a population base to vote on this. And it's a pill that you can swallow because, I mean, even if you're not at the elderly age, like, you cut yourself, you cut your arm while you're working in your garage, and all of a sudden, oh shoot, you got spurting blood, and you're trying to stop it, and you're used to somebody being 3 minutes away. Well, now you're trying to figure out how to open up this tourniquet that's still in the packaging because your hands are bloody and slipping, and then you're passing out. I mean, like there's some serious realities that are going to be coming down the pike, and there's going to be some horror stories. And once again, it's not scare tactics. I mean, I'm willing to go talk about the stuff that I train for in law enforcement for when I have combat injuries, and combat injuries happen on a daily basis. Like, think about a car crash.
Yep.
How quick our guys get to a car crash, and they get there with ambulance and fire, and now we don't have a staff that's there. We have a couple people, and maybe they're tied up with another incident, and we don't have that secondary. So now we're waiting for fire to get there, who can normally triage and hold and keep them alive because there's so many cross-trained people. Well, now you're waiting for Bay City's ambulance or whoever gets the contract. It's no matter what, it's an extra 15 minutes minimum. And I mean, how many people, I mean, I was a crash reconstructionist. I went to all those crashes, and I mean, she didn't end up making it, but the Sokol girl ended up, because of your guys, made it up alive enough to be able to provide for 10 other people. And how many people got pulled out of cars that were being set on fire from the crash? And I mean, your guys' quick response saves lives on car crashes alone.
So what we did with that little girl actually wound up saving 8 or 9 other little kids because of the organ donation. So yeah, there's quick response is key in small communities like this, because not everybody can get to the hospital by themselves. So you're 100% correct.
So we understand the value. I mean, look, I've been on calls that I actually personally witnessed. Driving ambulance while the paramedics were working on people. So we understand the value, all of us here. If we go to levy and it doesn't pass, what's our backup plan?
I think you do the levy, and you put it in the citizens' hands, and we have to, as a community, we have to face the consequences of an election. I think it's a reasonable thing.
I'm not sure that we would have
I don't think we have an alternative.
ability for a loan.
No.
And so that's
then
my
what?
hesitation with that, is that.
don't like that option either,
Yeah,
All we
I
do
mean,
is
I
kick
just-
the
I
can
don't-
down the road and we're in the
Yeah.
same spot.
Yeah.
No, I'm not
And again, yeah, and so then we'd be saddling our budget with another $1 million plus in
With
debt.
interest
With interest,
and inflation by the time.
and we wouldn't, and then to do what? Possibly get a taxing district, which, how long is the taxing district realistically going to take? Like, I do think that is long-term solution, even with compression or something like that, you know, like that's going to be our best foot forward, but I don't think we'll be able to finance it in the interim on a hope, you know, because if the levy were to fail and we can't buy us 5 years to develop the taxing district and, you know, going through that process as a long-term solution, I don't foresee how we could even do a loan. I don't think that's a viable option. So I would lean towards, we would have to just let them know, like, this is our best shot. This is in every effort to be the best for our citizens. It's not fun. Not many people can afford that extra $400 a year, but what is our basic, maybe cash price on an ambulance?
Like how much a new one costs? Last time we bought one, it was right at $200,000. Now they're...
Or even just like one ride?
Oh, as far as the transport?
Yeah.
So in town, it's going to be about $1,100, $1,200 for an in-town. If we go to Portland, it's $4,080. And then you...
Yeah, so this is a third. The proposal that we have here is a third of one ambulance ride. And I'll tell you, like, I'm sure you remember back in the day when Jason had to have an ambulance ride and from the Safeway robbery, and our bill, which ended up being paid by Safe since it happened at work, was $650. Earlier that year, Parker had an ambulance ride when we were over in Coos Bay, and it was more than double. So the reality is, it's $400 a year to save our own ambulance. Yes, everybody is paying it.
On
who
average.
don't, yeah, like my family, we have a family of 4. It would be an extra $400 a year to pay for an ambulance. Or we can bring in somewhere else, like Bay Cities, and you'll be charged double that you can't pay. So budgeting $35 a month,
Only caveat is that is the average, so the higher income houses, the more expensive valued
Absolutely.
house, they're gonna pay more.
yeah. But it
I'm
also is,
aware of that, but
the average tax assessed, one thing to know, for the average tax assessed value of the home is $151,800. That is not actually your RMV or your AMV. There is a different, like, so what you see on your tax statement,
Yeah.
there's some buffers, so that it's,
yeah, I'm just acknowledging the fact that some people are gonna pay more. But if you have that type of house and value, you're probably capable of paying more.
yeah, there's gonna be a
And
little
there's
bit
also-
more there, but,
That's the average, so a lot of them are lower and half of them will pay less,
yeah.
Yeah.
so.
But, I just think, our only path forward is to get it on this year, to try and get the taxing district, this will suck if we have to deal with it in 5 years, but I would prefer to buy our citizens 5 years of a solution so we can figure out something else than nothing now.
Well, and then it's a known deadline. Like, once again, we're coming up on this
Yeah.
deadline. We've tried to fix it. We're going to have to do it again. Like, you guys know the deal. Right now, it's like kind of a surprise. Like, things happen. It's happening fast. Holy crap. Like, we're used to this, and we're going to lose it. At least you say, hey, in 5 years, you're going to make a decision. Did you like what we did? Is it worth doing again? And...
Or here's another alternative solution that,
yeah, because then we got time to make the district and make decisions and stuff. And maybe there's a lawsuit by all the cities coming together to sue the companies by then. That's the only thing that's going to fix this is somebody getting sued and then having to fix it. Or maybe there's laws put in place. There's certain things going on right now that it wouldn't shock me if there's some federal regulations on this stuff. Like, there's a lot of opportunities that maybe this problem is fixed by the time that 5-year levy's up.
we can all start writing into policies for people and seeing if we can get some of this stuff put on there.
Yeah, it sounds like they need to be put in check. You talked about all the cities that are going to be facing that, but what's the solution? The only thing I can think of is a class action lawsuit against them to put them in check.
Well, and those cities, it's not necessarily related to ambulance service, but I will say that there is a move afoot for tax reform in Oregon. There's some short-term things, but the long-term is, we've got these 2 laws that create the caps, like, real estate resets.
Yeah,
Right?
the 1997 Tax Act.
So when you look at that, it's like, so in most states, if you had an assessed value on your house of $150,000 and then you sell it for $450,000, there's a reset on the taxes. But that's currently capped in Oregon, and the conventional wisdom is that in 2032, that will come to the voters statewide to get some of those things fixed. If you all go forward with this evening, that doesn't mean that we don't work on a district and figure out all these fine things about compression and everything. And the district could be, I believe, let's say we get it figured out on a district that's the whole deal. That could come, maybe that doesn't happen next year, but it might happen the year after. Once we know what it would really yield, how the compression works, all those things, but it would give us time to work on that. And that could happen sooner than 5 years for an opportunity to voters. And if it didn't pass, I don't think that would extinguish our current levy. So that would be a 5-year solution. What we would need, I think, if the council decides to go forward with this, is that we would need some help in the messaging. City staff can provide information, right, but we cannot be advocates.
I was gonna ask, assuming we're moving forward, how, I mean, I'm down for advocating. I know we've wanted to have town meetings. This is by far the most important reason to do it. Almost, and actually almost immediately, and then, you know, making sure we have the data. If Chief is there to be able to support that, that would be important, because he's the voice of the department. But I would have no problem hosting meetings like that and advocate both. And I think it's more than just on social media. We need to be in people's spaces and places with every opportunity that we can create, both morning, afternoon, and evening, if possible, in our city. And I would hope, if this does move forward and it's approved, that our outside of city district understands the value and the importance of what the ambulance provides, and that they would be equally hearing the messaging. I think our messaging now is equally important to the future of the taxing district, because we need them to be on board. Otherwise, this has the ramification to negatively impact, and we can't play the what ifs. But our messaging now is very important, not only for now, but for the future taxing district.
Yeah, and I think it in town halls, videos, case studies, like examples of how certain cases have played out and what they would do differently with time. Like, show 5 to 10 examples of what would happen, the reality of it. Like, I mean, I'll volunteer to talk about my dad's. My dad had a heart attack, a widowmaker. He was dead man on his feet. They got there, their immediate action and their decision making to be able to say, I'm going directly to Coos Bay, to Bay Area Hospital, because he needs their services right now to save his life. Had it been 3 minutes different, like, my dad probably would have died on the drive to the hospital, and then crashed. And whoever was down at Fifth Street Park that got hit, I mean, like, it's, you can kind of play it up however you want, but, like, he was probably going to crash into somebody's front yard or whatnot. I mean, it's just, did he run a stop sign? Like, who knows? Like, and I just think we're going to have chaos of people trying to get themselves or take their family member, and there's going to be more rippling effects.
I don't know, I was compelled by what he was saying, so that's fine. And, you know, staff obviously will do everything we can to support this. I think if that's where you want to go, then, you know, we'll give it the full-on push. Oh, I know what I was going to say. I think an important aspect of this that we work into it is the impact it'll have on our fire service. Because that's a serious...
Yeah, they're hand in hand.
You know, it's nothing is not interrelated, but this is very interrelated to the impact it would have on our fire services to lose these really valuable people that work on the ambulance, but they also work on fire.
Yeah, and you know, that messaging is going to be important, because I'm one of those volunteers who's almost never there now. But the message is, you can even have an increase in volunteerism, but it doesn't matter if all your volunteers work day jobs in Coos Bay.
Right.
So, I mean, we're talking about a response time during a window of time in which our volunteers are not available. Right. And so, you know, that's part of that messaging, the accurate messaging that we need to make sure out there about our volunteers.
There's no requirement for your volunteer to respond. That's plain and simple. I mean, even at night, sometimes on certain calls that sound mundane, like, at least I know I've got the career guys showing up. Our volunteers do a really good job at showing up, but sometimes they'll listen and be like, I don't think they'll need me. I'll listen and make sure that they don't. But
back to the type of work that the volunteers are doing, you have a lot of people that are willing to show up to be that extra hand. But if the work environment comes down to it's 2 volunteers and the chief going to a fire, and it's super dangerous or it's super stressful, and they're having to do something that's over their head, like, they're not gonna keep volunteering.
Well, and it'd be inappropriate to ask for volunteers to take on that level of risk you know, and I think that's an important factor as well, and like, it's, by no means are you overstaffed, you know, that's the reality, and, you know, every single one of them are deserving of that, and we need to try and protect those jobs as much as possible.
I do ask those volunteers to take on the same risk that the career guys do, and they're more than willing to do it, but that only goes so far in,
Right.
and it's the making sure that somebody is going to show up, because they've got jobs, and quite frankly, the ones that are even part-time are going to have to go find other jobs to make the extra little bit of money that they make off of running on the ambulance and everything else. So we have a great group of volunteers. We do, and they do awesome things. But having career personnel is also super important, because those volunteers have other jobs as well.
They do an awesome work, and so Forrest, one of the things staff could help us, if you don't mind, is what are we allowed to legally do, both staff, i.e. Chief Farron, and you and us, you know, how many of us can meet and hold these meetings and not have a quorum? You know, what are all the legal ramifications so that we can plan accordingly? And I'm down for doing whatever is required.
Well, it's probably as long as it's a public meeting that's announced properly. I don't see there's a problem with.
No, if you're announcing like a city open house or a town hall, I mean, that's a council meeting. You know, I mean, we won't have problems notifying that. Generally, because we have a 7-member council, then 3 would be the maximum at a, like, you got a Rotary. 3 is the, you know, max, that kind of thing. But, yeah, and staff can develop informational materials. And, you know, generally when Chief Farron is speaking, he's speaking about facts. And that's data, that's, you know, that's information. And, you know, even this implication that there'll be less available firefighters is a fact. That's a fact. I mean, you get rid of these folks that are working on the ambulance that respond to fires, they're not going to be there, right? Because they lost their job with the city. And so, I mean, you know, it is very vital for the citizens to understand that that is part of the deal. So.
Oh, you gotta talk.
Oh, do it, buddy.
Yeah, I'm sorry I haven't said anything. This is definitely near to my heart, so. With my career here, probably the last 10 years, we were dealing with the ambulance. And Chief, I'm sorry that myself and the previous staff couldn't have figured this out for you. But it's just, I'll do anything to keep the ambulance service here. Just looking at, nothing against Myrtle Point or Bay Cities. It's just the response times, like Councilor Cooper was saying. You lose your firefighters. Bay Cities only has 1 fire department that the fire department doesn't respond for them. You may not have the personnel to respond to help the citizens. Bay Cities, yeah, if they're on transfer, the other one's coming, and you're not obligated to do that because you may not have that personnel. So I would do anything to try to make whatever to keep the ambulance here. So, yeah.
So you're signing up to be at those meetings?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, like you said, I mean, nothing against the other agencies. Like, it's just the fact of the matter is that's how it's going to function. They're not going to have staff sitting here in Coquille waiting to respond like what we have now. They don't do that in Bandon. They've had that contract for a long time. Like, it's just the nature of the beast. Like, no discrediting to what they do. They are phenomenal to work with. But we have somebody devoted to us.
And no question, I mean, it's us, it's our people, it's our city, it's our fire and rescue and ambulance service. They have just, all the years of a long-standing excellence of service and response and everything that's been done over the years. Chief Waddington before you, and now Chief Aaron, and it just doesn't go well. I know, Chief Aaron, you've lost sleep. I know our staff's lost sleep. I've lost sleep, actually, off and on, just thinking about if we didn't have it. It's just tough. And so it's our people. We want it to be our city, our people, for sure. If possible. I mean, right now, I mean, I agree with Councilor Corvus, and I mean, I just don't see how we can go into debt. I think we just got to get in front of people and do the best, the darndest best we can do with the messaging, and let our people decide. And you know, and I will say, as Cooper has said, our fire and rescue, man, they have sold it. I mean, they're the real deal, and I'm proud to be part of that. And so, so that is the difference maker in this situation.
So Forrest, is there anything on this vote in May, like, do they get rid of that 50-50, where you have to have 50% of the people vote in favor of, or?
I believe it's,
Couple years ago?
I believe it's a simple majority,
Okay,
Yeah, 50 plus 1, I think.
yeah.
yeah.
I'd say the only way that going out for debt, for a loan, is if we're for sure going to have been able to catch up by this time. Like if this will float us until what just got sprung on us is caught up, and we're willing to continue as we have to pay for it as like a service like we have with the pool. Like it's something that the taxpayer money is we're willing to spend, even though we know we're taking a loss as far as maintaining it. Like it's not revenue, you know, it's an expense for the city to cover all the BS that comes with the billing and the insurance. But if this levy doesn't pass, but we are able to get a loan to get us through dealing with what we're dealing with, the thing that caused us to not be able to fund the ambulance, and we were able to get past that, fix it, and then we're willing to pay a premium for it, then I'm okay with it. But that's
I think in that regards, so the election's May 20th, right? So we'd have an answer from the voters then. We also will be well along in budget, right? At that point, you pretty much know what the budget's going to be, that we will have had the budget committee meeting, all that stuff, and we'll actually know then where we're at. And, you know, that could be the very last ditch effort to look at that.
once again, as Councilor Curtis, I don't think it's a reality. I don't think we're going to be able to get it. But who knows? Maybe there's something available to us. I mean, it worked out really well for us with the water projects and stuff. Like, maybe we find something that will cover us during that time. Or maybe we explain what we're dealing with, and we are willing to pay a little bit of a premium and interest in order to do it, but to get through the storm,
Right.
to then be able to go back to budgeting it in. But I understand where we're at as far as the issue at hand being the trigger of we can't keep doing this, but if we can deal with it in 5 years and be willing to do it again, like, we're not going to be able to start the ambulance back up. It's,
Right.
If
Right.
we lose it, it's gone forever, never coming back, done.
Right, because it get divided up and the ASAs will go to other operators and, yeah.
So maybe it's a life raft to get us down a little ways with a loan?
Without the levy, The loan option was $750,000, $750,000 to just buy us 1 year. Because there isn't any money to magically find. And so, we might be able to adjust a budget $250,000, but almost $1 million, no way. So that's a known fact. So without a levy, and that's the messaging, without this approved levy, and if we're uncomfortable going into debt because of our budget issues, even if we went into debt $750,000, we're rolling the dice because we already know we still can't get the taxing district done in time and money coming in time, even in that 1 year. And so a loan,
It would be a 1.5 million loan minimum.
we would have to minimum do that much,
Yeah.
minimum. And even then, now we're in and we'll know this May, because if they don't vote for it, then there's a good chance the taxing district won't vote for it. I mean, if our own city won't vote to keep our fire and rescue, then probably a taxing district won't. And we'll know. We're not going to do $1.5 million loan because the people have spoken.
That, and then we cut our budget by a third this year.
Right.
So that alone is going to blow us out of any solvency abilities. And, we had to do that so we can put ourselves back on track, but we also know that it's going to be reflective in the future budgets that we're going to be cut down pretty low until we can make up ground. So when that happens and then the proposed budget is taken into consideration, it's also going to be reduced, so we're not going to show affordability. So one of the reasons why it worked out so well with like the water district, and it stung when you guys had to do that because that was before me, is that it only worked out that way because rates were increased, water rates were increased to a level where we could show affordability.
Right.
And then once we showed that affordability, we were able to get a forgivable loan and a long-term 1% interest rate loan. Now correct me if I'm wrong, because I haven't heard of anything that is like that for fire and
No.
ambulance. So I
There's
just think,
not.
yeah, like if we could do something along those lines and adjust some sort of billings, that could be a solution, except for the biggest issue that we're having is that our billings are held hostage with Medicare and OHP, and the government isn't going to be willing to pay us any more money.
That's
I mean,
correct.
period. And so, unless we had something like the tax reform, or in my opinion, I haven't fully vetted out this thought process, but like, personally, I kind of foresee the best solution making it where the state needs to take the cuts. There's no reason why they should be getting the amount of taxes that they get from us. Our counties and cities should first and foremost be solvent, and the state should be running off of a percentage of our solvency. Yes, there's things like child welfare and Oregon State Police that are much needed, but we shouldn't have to go to the state and ask for a grant back, because we send them that money anyways, and we have to go and ask for it back. I think the final solution is a way better reform than what we have imagined. Yeah. But, for now, what we can do is try and save it for the next 5 years and figure out a pivotal point. Maybe we can try the taxing district, and maybe the taxing district fails, but maybe by that point, we have so much other reform going on that we can come to a different final solution that we can't even imagine right now.
Yeah.
That would be way more beneficial to our cities, to our counties, and have finally good solutions, because there's plenty of revenue that comes here. It's a ton is sent up and not ever given back to us. I talked so much, I got a tickle in my throat. I wasn't even coughing before.
Chief, was there talk between you and Chief Burris about consolidation at all, or
So
voting of some sort?
we have discussed it minutely, just in looking at all options in all directions that it could potentially go. If that is the direction that the taxpayers decide we're gonna go, I think that's probably the lesser of the evils.
Absolutely.
I think Myrtle Point still has that hometown feel and that care for community. Again, not dissing on anybody else, but I think that we work pretty well together already. I mean, we're already auto-aiding. Like, consolidation and mergers, it's doable, but I don't know if it's doable in the timeline that we have. So it would be more of a them taking over and going forward from there, I think, than anything, and maybe contracting with them for.
Is 5 years a reasonable amount of time to do it?
Yeah, potentially. It's going to take some research and
Technically,
whatnot.
you need to decide that, is that an ASA, is that, like, technically,
Yeah, it would come down to the ASA, but Coquille has a vote in the ASA, Myrtle Point has a vote in the ASA, and Bay Cities has a vote in the ASA. So there's equal votes there that if that's the route that both entities want to go, it's definitely a possibility. It's hard when you're both city entities. Eugene Springfield did it. It is challenging, and there's many dynamics that have to come into play, such as in Eugene Springfield, I believe that if you were originally Eugene, you make one, your people make one pay, and then if you were originally Springfield, they make another pay, and there's many challenging dynamics there, so it's something that can be looked at, and it can be done because multiple entities are doing it. Tualatin Valley Fire and Rescue is probably the most famous for it in consolidation and mergers, and even I think it's Jeff Johnson was the fire chief up there when they started it. He's written a book on doing such things. So,
Question. Okay. Say it goes out to vote. I think it'll pass. I really do. I think we got a good product, and once we explain the reality, I think everyone's going to have to buy into it. But say it doesn't. Okay, now we're looking at contracting, because our ambulance is gone. It's not coming back forever. Done. Because we can't revitalize that after this shift happens. Okay, if we go with Myrtle Point over big cities, just by location preference, like you were saying, more hometown feel,
Yeah.
they're never going
9
to
miles
be
away.
30 minutes away. They're always going to be 10 more minutes away. Like
Yes.
maybe 15, 20. I guess if they're out in Bridge or they're out in
On a
like
tram.
Powers or something like that, I mean, I guess there is a way that it could be, but my guess is they get that contract, they're going to expand. Like, they're not going to keep running the same staff they have, so they're probably going to be able to absorb some of our people that are going to lose their jobs here, because they're going to go somewhere else. Well, maybe that's a viable option if the voters make their decision and they don't keep this going. Myrtle Point gets the contract, Myrtle Point grows, maybe we sell them our ambulances and some of our people go there. Our people that are here are still working with our firefighters, and it's kind of a merger in essence, just in the worst scenario that we can. It's the best of those scenarios, you know? And I that's what I would lean towards. Like, if it doesn't succeed, that's what I would recommend, because we can salvage a little bit of what we have. But maybe, I don't think they'll be able to pick up everybody. Like, the contract's not going to cover full stuff. But, you know, maybe they can save half of them, but I think we're gonna lose a lot of people.
Yes. I think that's best worst case scenario, 100%. I think that that is probably, if it doesn't pass, probably the most viable option for the ambulance side of things.
If that were to happen, how many do you think they would pick up if they expanded to that contract?
That's a conversation that we'll have to have. I don't.
Oh, I'm just
don't
guessing,
have-
like, are they picking up 4 people out of the 8? Or, like, I mean, I don't think they're gonna expand double.
I think the hard part with that, figuring it out, is because they would eventually have to expand their taxing district over here. You know, because other than that, they're gonna be at a 38% pay rate.
Yeah, they're absorbing
Yeah.
higher costs in
Yeah.
pay. I mean, it's how do, they're gonna face the same thing.
Yeah, so I would honestly be shocked if they could save 4 people until they got, I mean, like, so honestly,
Potentially
like,
3.
so, but let's walk that out. If they were to absorb us, and eventually they're gonna have, like, the ASA would probably have to vote to expand their taxing district, and our taxes would increase anyways,
If,
right?
if the taxing district is approved and the voters approve the tax, yes. So they would, Myrtle Point would be up against the same challenges we are. So
Exactly.
it's not a foregone conclusion.
So-
We're gonna absorb X amount of employees. It's a conversation that has to be.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of
on paper.
data.
They have to work on it on paper, so it's still gonna affect our response times and transfers and everything else, yeah.
Is there any responsibility of the city to have a contract that we're gonna budget a line item for them? I think it's probably not, because, like, if it was fire, like, say something catastrophic happened and we lost our fire department, now we have to contract to have somebody else come in. Like, but with ambulance, it's not the same, right? Okay, it's not, it doesn't set off like a trigger domino effect or
I
nothing.
mean, we don't have an obligation to provide ambulance services. At the same time, I think this notion of contracting with Myrtle, it's gonna fall into the ASA discussion. I mean, for them to do it, because they're constrained by their current district, okay, as far as their funding goes. I don't think that necessarily changes if they expand their ASA initially, but they would want to do that over time, and then, you know, it would come to another vote of the community to see if they do that. So, you know, if you were running like straight numbers, you know, they might pick up a couple of employees based upon billings, but that's that's a complicated conversation.
Yeah. The reason that came to mind was the debacle in Lakeside, when they didn't meet certain requirements. I don't know if it was ambulance or if it was fire. I don't know all the in the weeds details, but I know that, like, something happened there, and because something wasn't operational, then Hauser had to absorb it to make it work for the time being. Otherwise, like, it was triggering, like, insurance rates and all kinds of stuff that would come from it. And I just remember that being a huge catastrophe, and it was like, the city up there realized that they needed to fix it quick in order, because it wasn't worth everything else that's come with it. So if we had a mandate for an ambulance part, like, I was just wondering how much that would be versus half an hour
I think
contract for
the
fire.
current ASA, we have a mandate to have an ambulance, but that process would be the reassignment of the ASA.
Correct, and have to give 90 days notice to the ASA committee to, if you're giving up your ASA. I believe is what it states in the ASA agreement.
So I mean, so May 20, we would be giving it, depending on what the voters decide, if it doesn't go the way we hope, 90-day clock starts somewhere around there whenever we decide. So we'll still be funding the ambulance beyond,
Well, through August.
yeah. I mean, and that's, of course, to me, that's still worth it. I mean, we should be able to absorb that, and we're all shaking our heads. So that's still worth it, but it's just the reality we might face.
Right, if assuming you approve this resolution and it goes to voters, then we would just, look at June's this year, that's fine, and then July and August, for the following year's budget as, as a placeholder. And, we'll know when we do our final budget approval, but we'll work that into the budget, kind of as a regardless thing, and then, so.
Technically, what's our timing window? We could hold off on our final budget approval till after May 20, correct?
Well, we would, because the final budget approval is at your June meeting. So we'll have a provisional, a draft budget that we do in May, and then, but we would put those numbers in there. Which, yeah.
Because even then, we have to have some numbers in there because we're not going to see revenue.
Till November.
Till November.
Yeah.
And so, which I think, so, we're not going to see revenue till November, and I think, Forrest, if I remember, you had mentioned that shouldn't be an issue. So, it's not something we have to go out for a loan to buy us time till November.
For 4 months.
Yeah,
They
yeah.
probably would, to be conservative, budget for 4 months of ambulance service, essentially July, August, September, October. And we would have that in there, and, maybe November, so 5 months. And then, then that makes it work for the tax collections and all that. I mean, regardless, we're gonna have to do that. Now, if they don't pass it, we've got it covered then. We have time to notify the ASA, give them their 90 days, and get all that stuff working. So, got that note, Michelle? Yeah.
I like that as a,
Yep.
as a worst-case transition piece, if needed.
I mean, all things considered, having the option to put it out to the public, and do you want it or not, isn't too horrible of a situation for us as a city council. It's not like we're just making a decision, like, it's going away. It's up to you guys, like, do you want it or not? And this is the reality of both options, and let the chips fall where they may. We serve our community, we serve our citizens, and if they vote that they don't want it, they face the consequences. I think putting it in their hands is the best case scenario for us as far as how we deal with it. So I don't have a problem with the way this is going to be decided.
I will step right up and make a motion
Second.
that we will approve resolution number 02-2025, a resolution calling for an election in the city of Coquille on May 2025 to submit to city voters the creation of a local option tax to support ambulance services for 5 years.
Second.
All right, motion by Mayor Flaherty, resolution number 02-2025, seconded by Councilor Cooper. Any other discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Passes unanimously. Since we have 4 of us here, and by the way, just so if the people are listening online and we post this later, Jake's out responding, and we've got Councilor Chappelle and Strom not here. But of the 4 here, maybe before we go, just a few minutes, is there, we literally only have 2 months. So March, April, we really, 2.5 months maybe for messaging. So, I don't know what this looks like. I know we have a meeting next next Monday. So we can start there, obviously, but maybe, I don't know if we think about this in the next week, and we can talk about it next week in a public meeting, but we have 2.5 months to figure out a calendar to create these opportunities for messaging, so.
So I think maybe we should have a work session at the start of the next council meeting. So y'all can brainstorm, ideas, half an hour, yeah. That'll work, and then we can talk about ideas and start to put together, kind of an action plan of how that's gonna work.
I think we're about to get the attention of a lot of our citizens that don't necessarily normally pay attention to what's going on. And depending on what kind of word gets out and the amount of people that are interested, this might not be a big enough venue for meetings going forward. Or at least a live stream for the next few of them, like at least advertise the town hall or something with a date ahead of time. And
We can do the small auditorium in the county. That's what I would recommend, some like community center.
Yeah, I think it's going to be packed as soon as this is posted. And I think there's going to be a lot of people that are going to be very much involved and in attendance.
And the work session, you guys, is not to discuss per se altogether the details. It's to figure out our strategy for messaging. So it's a public work session, so people could be here, but it's not for us to regurgitate the ideas. It's for us to figure out a strategy of messaging meetings. So I think we should come with our calendars and.
Oh, for sure, because we would want to set like the first town hall meeting, a date, all that stuff.
Because that will trigger a lot for our staff, because with messaging is now the data we need, and what do flyers start to look, informative flyers, what do social media posts start looking like, so that we can start rolling out a lot of information. And so that's the intent of the work session. And hopefully we will have our sound fixed next week. And so I, for one, will have no problem during mayor's comment, and anybody else who wants to, it's your prerogative during comments. And certainly for good of the order, if we wish to add to the good of the order to discuss this, we certainly can. That's our prerogative. That actually might be the best spot, actually. The good of the order.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah. So. And in the meantime, I think this memo and resolution is already on our city website, yeah? So, if anybody asks, and you don't have it right in front of you, by the way, we should talk about that next work session, is what information do we need to have on our phones, that we're able to communicate. But at the very least, direct people to our city website. They can find this information. This is a great start to some of that information. And,
And we'll make available, one thing that Michelle worked on, which you don't have in your packets tonight, but is a really good piece of information on the escalating costs and why. Our expenditures have increased over the last 10 years by 400%. So why is that, right? But did our billings get up by that much? Not at all. But the costs of, and it is primarily personnel costs. But you want a paramedic to show up on that ambulance. That's crucial, right? And the cost of those employees have gone up. You thank the state for that and for other costs like insurance and all those things that add up.
go ahead, Chief.
Yeah.
So a couple of years ago, I did some training through, I think it was like an attorney's office that talks about FLSA issues, and one of the big reasons for making a lot of our volunteers part-time was if you are requiring them to be there, you are scheduling them to be there, you are providing all the equipment and everything else, they are an employee at that point and they have to be paid. So that caused a few years ago some increases in the cost of personnel. So that kind of helps to explain some of those increases. You can't schedule somebody and have them be a volunteer. So if we don't schedule them, then we can't guarantee we're going to have an ambulance respond.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, the Fair Labor Standard Act is important, and it's important that we treat people as employees if they're employees, and if you're scheduling them, you have to. And I mean, and that's not unique to the ambulance service. It's true with all employees, just like we're going through this thing of, you know, what constitutes a volunteer? And then what are the costs of, you know, we have to list all of our volunteers for workers' comp and for all these other things that 10 years ago you didn't have to, but you do now.
And the other thing is, how many of your employees, part-time employees and full-time, live outside of the city? So, like, by that same token, when you have part-time people that are scheduled to be there, now you know you have those people in our city to respond. So they might, even if they were just volunteers, they probably wouldn't even be involved in our city, and they would be elsewhere. We wouldn't have that volunteer to respond had they not been there scheduled. So, a factor too. I can think of several of them that live outside of the city that wouldn't necessarily make it if they were doing some other job at the time.
There are several. We have some that live in the district but not in the city, and then we have some that don't live anywhere nearby, like some that actually travel down from up north, as far as like Eugene and whatnot. So there's some that are coming down to pulse shifts to cover time off and everything else that are coming from quite a ways. Some coming from Charleston, some coming from Coos Bay, some coming from Bandon, Myrtle Point, kind of all over the place, because volunteerism is becoming a thing of the past.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Hey, Forrest, can we gear up towards a dedicated page for this tax levy on our city page with a link on the home page? Can we put links to, so the research Michelle did, this resolution with my signed signature, can we put all those things so every geek and nerd and person who wants to research it? Also, I'm thinking pictures of all our paramedics, so a group picture. I mean, when our people see the men and women who saved their lives and their loved ones, and so there's a way that we can sure have it be informative, but also it's personal. This is us. And so I would love to see a page geared that way. Also, if that page is there, then I know if I'm caught somewhere and I don't have the information ready, I can go straight to the city page and I can show somebody how to get it, and I'll get the answer for them. So that's the kind of thing I'm thinking we need in the background supporting this.
I'm also thinking an explanation of what led us to this point. Like, all of that is one thing. As far as our explanation, the sale of this, we have to have the most communication that we possibly can right now, so that way, a lot of times the what ifs and the speculation and the assumptions end up being worse than the what is, and just to put it all out there, like, this is what we're dealing with, this is why we're dealing with this is what we're up against, this is how we solve it. I think the most communication we can do right now, I mean, we got nothing hiding. No, it wasn't us that caused the problem, we're just finding it. And I think show everything open book and The more transparency we have, the more communication we have, the more advantageous for our cause.
And the messaging is simple. With rising costs and less income, insurance company, I mean, that's the messaging all by itself. The only reason we're in the very specific urgency we're in is because of the recent budget crisis, but we were already in crisis with the ambulance. 2 years ago,
Right.
this council was already talking about, and then this last budget, we said we have to find a solution this year. And so just to remind everybody, the messaging's easy, even though we obviously found an issue with our budget and a shortfall. The messaging's pretty straightforward. We're just,
I just know that there's going to be a lot. Let's put it this way. The first message leads the narrative. You look at the media, they can throw something that they know is a total lie, but it's the first thing out there, and then you're trying the whole time to combat that lie and to convince people, and when they finally have to make a statement about that they were wrong, it's on the back page, not the front page with the picture. So if we put everything out there to get rid of any possibility, there's going to be people that are going to try and stir the pot just because it's fun for them. And they're going to be like, there's money missing at the city, there's got to be embezzlement, there's got to be all this problem. No, it's a freaking error from the past that we didn't catch because the past was not caught up, and because we're being responsible as a city now and doing what's right, now we've come to the point where it's close enough in our audits that we can see that there's an issue. And if we lead with that, then the majority of the people know that, and the people that read it will know that, and they can say, shut up to the people that are the liars and the instigators and all the problems that make the assumptions. So I'm saying it's in our best interest to completely talk about everything.
well, just to be clear, we always do, but John, I'm saying the narrative is not so much a mistake. The narrative is, it's the real world issue in the ambulance service right now. And if we want an ambulance service in the city of Coquille, that's what we gotta communicate, because even if we didn't have that error, we were already talking about an ambulance service that was not being, we couldn't support it. So that's everything we do is transparent.
Our urgency right now, well, I'm not saying we're not transparent. Like, we've already had these discussions,
Well-
and it's documented, but I'm saying attach what we've done to it, because it's an urgent thing right now, and we don't get another redo. And if the general population thinks, we're still going to get the service, like, it doesn't really matter. That's what they did with the sheriff's office. We're still going to get the service. I'm not going to pay more. The school, our kids are still going to be funded. We're still going to school. We're not going to have that extra stuff, but they'll figure it out. No, there's no figuring this out. It's gone. Like, it will never be what we have now. It will, even if it's great for what it is, like, Bay City's ambulance does phenomenal service. Mobile does phenomenal service. But it will be a time increase. You are never going to have a 2-3 minute response. You will from now on be 15 plus minutes. And did you survive an incident because of it, or did your parents survive an incident because of it? I'm just saying, like, we've been transparent, we've always been transparent. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying the more that we're upfront, throwing everything out there, like, the reason we're going here is, and so fast, is this.
I'm only taking exception to the narrative
Yeah.
of how you communicate that suggests we have not been transparent.
Oh, no.
So
No.
that's, I'm just saying, I
Yeah.
agree.
People
with
are
you.
gonna allude to
I
that.
agree with you, the messaging is important.
Yeah.
But how we message it
Yeah.
isn't.
I think we preface it,
And-
is what I'm saying.
Yeah, and so I fully agree with what you're saying. Like, I completely get all of that. The only thing that I would probably say caution to is we need to figure out and understand when we're getting into the weeds of things, that isn't going to be a solution.
Yeah.
While I think it's important to understand, like, yeah, the urgency to this is brought on by the previous admin, and we got caught up with the audits, which is what discovered that. However, that piece is going to be a weed of it because it's just going to be a talking point. It's not going to provide a solution. The reality is, if we spend 5 seconds on that, then fine. But too many people are going to want to spend hours on that, and it's going to be very unproductive. So, that's what we need to figure out is, what is going to be the core pieces that gets us to a resolution, even if it's not the resolution that we want. What are those core pieces going to be so that this way we're not getting lost into the weeds of it. And that's where false information comes out of, is by getting into those weeds. I think that, definitely this council is very transparent. We want, all of our hearts are in the right place. Yeah. It's not even like the best of intentions kind of thing, because, I always am like, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Like, we do everything we can to be on the up and up and to be transparent. But, if there's too much that just isn't pointed at how do we get on a path of resolution, or these are the options that we have available to get us at, to this next step, or this is the final solution, then I think that's going to be how we can craft that, because sometimes too much just gets the judgment clouded.
Yeah, I think the strategy and the messaging is we need 5 years. And by the way, if I were a citizen of the city, which I am, and I know I'm now funding 400 square miles, I want to know what the city has to say about the solution to that. So part of our message is in that 5 years, we're working towards a taxing district. And so, so that is a consistent pathway towards a probable solution. Also, I think it's just as viable to say, and we don't know after 5 years. We could pray and lobby and hope that the government and the state and these insurance agencies are held to account and we start getting paid. And then this isn't an issue. But this is our 5-year plan, and here's A, B, and C, and that's all we know.
Yeah, and I'll just say, I understand what you heard and where it went as far as whether or not there was the transparency. I more am talking in relation to government entities in general often don't give all that is necessary to be known, not necessarily for any ill purpose. It doesn't end up out there. Prime example, my line of work, ODF&W knows why certain things are in place. They don't communicate the why to the public. The sportsmen think it's stupid. They have no buy-in. They don't care about it, but it's actually got valid reasons. I'm in the middle, and I go to them, I go, well, I need to know the why before I do any enforcement. They explain the why. It makes sense.
Well,
Had they communicated a little bit more of the lead up to what their rule is, they would get the buy-in of the public. And that's where my thing is the more that we communicate to them, the more that we are like, this is everything that we know that led up to this, and this is what we're dealing with. Like, we weren't going to deal with the ambulance yet. We were going to keep kicking that can down the road, but now it's an emergency. Like, we could have funded it for years, potentially.
No, we were not going to keep kicking it.
We had to know, essentially, staff was going to start working on a plan in October.
And they found the budget crisis.
Right, and then we got diverted that. But I think the major issue is that rising cost of services versus the amount that insurances will pay has made it impossible for the city to continue to fund it. Because the differential.
$150,000 a year.
And that's actually, I think, the point right there.
It is.
Because the reality of this situation is none of us here would buy a business where you have a 72% loss rate. It's not viable. No matter if it was...
Government efficiency.
Yeah. No, because they're not inefficient. Like, the reality, like,
No, I'm
you know.
saying everything else that goes with it, their hands are tied versus private.
Because the amount
Well, also,
billed,
because versus private, you can probably, you can do liens on people's homes and, which isn't, yeah, I mean, there's going to be a little bit more, but with us being a public entity, the reality is if any of us were looking at this as a business model, none of us would buy it because the rate of loss is too egregious. And then when you have the fact that you can't raise your revenue, right, pretty much at all, and then you have a 400% inflation, you're dead.
I mean,
in the water,
the amount
right there.
billed, if it was paid, the ambulance service would be profitable. It would actually make a little bit of money.
Right.
But if I came to the credit union and said, hey, I want to start a business and I'm only going to get 40% of my billed revenues, and my costs are 95% of billed, you'd be like, you're insane. I mean, that's an insane
insolvent.
business model.
Yeah. No, I mean, 100%. And so that's why, I mean, this is a service, and we need to find a solution for this service, period. The members of our district that we service, and our citizens, their lives are important, that we have to try and find a solution. But ultimately, and unfortunately, that could be a no. And we have to just deal with that if that's the case. That it would be devastating, but I think it's the only shot we got. And just figuring out some pointed conversations so that it's not riling up people in the sense of going, well, why wasn't this dealt with 5 years ago? I don't know. I've been on council 2 years. I'm going on my second year. Those are not going to be productive conversations, and they're going to just steal from the momentum that we could build. And I think getting another page, I think getting bios, if we don't have those already, understanding who our people are, putting a face to it, maybe a couple of different stories of, situations that you guys have seen, really getting that knowledge and a ton of data points on it. This is a great piece of data points that we already have starting off, but hey, we service 400 square feet. This is the rate of our billings. This is the rate of our pay. I can't remember if I've heard before, but I don't know that it's completely vetted. OHP pays 40 cents on the dollar. I think Medicaid might be a little bit higher than that, or vice versa. But that's also more on the medical side, not necessarily on ambulance side, that I've heard this type of stuff from people in that industry. But I think the more facts that we can get, the more, this is the response time that we have. These are the services that we provide. This is the value that we have for our fire and our ambulance. And this is what it would look like without that. Is going to be the most transparent way that we can present that information, in the most streamlined way that we can present it too, so that we're not getting lost in the weeds, and inviting people to go down to consider things that aren't going to help us with a solution, because that's all just wasted energy.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And remember too, the messaging is, yes, it's ambulance, but we're going to remind ourselves this affects the whole department. This is
Right.
Coquille Fire and Rescue and ambulance. And so, because the loss of that ambulance has a definite impact on the fire.
And maybe, I'm sure there's all kinds of statistics, Chief, that say response time matters.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that's a great catchphrase. Response time matters. Here's why.
We
you
have
know,
story after story after story in this city.
Well, there's not just the stories, but I'm sure that there's statistical data that says that, I know there is. I don't have my hands on it, but I know there is. It says, look, if the ambulance can get to you within 7 minutes, here's your chance of surviving.
There's not just statistics, there's also standards. Well, they're not rules or laws, NFPA sets the standard for what fire response is, and we strive to meet NFPA standards as much as we can. There's a lot of standards out there for it, but I don't know that there's a standard per se for the ambulance other than in the ASA agreement that says we will have a response within so many minutes, which without us here, I don't know how somebody meets those
Those would be good to
Right.
know.
standards.
Right.
Because I will tell you, if we don't vote for this, that is going to be dramatically impacted. We all agree to
Right.
that. And so it would be good to know those kinds of things. I think it's great to know the fire side. I think it's great to know the ASA side, for sure. Yeah.
What's gonna happen, and same thing that happens to Bandon, if, say, Bay City's ambulance were to get it, they're gonna open a station here in town to satisfy requirements, and their best intention is gonna be that they're gonna have staff here to be able to respond. The reality is that as the one in Bunker Hill is tied up with a crash up in Lakeside, somebody's moving up to be able to respond to all their obligations. If that second one gets tied up, like, it never happens in our county that we have 4 crashes at once in bad weather, you know? So they're tied up. Well, now ours shifted up. Well, if something happens north, ours is tied up there. It wasn't what they intended. They wanted to have them available here. It's just the nature of the beast. It has nothing to do with whether they're doing what's right. They're doing what they have to do. Now, we don't have an ambulance. Okay, now we're asking Myrtle Point. Well, Myrtle Point's caught up on a crash. All right, we don't have one. Right now, we have one because they're staying for us. They're not going elsewhere.
Right.
They're ours.
So, is there a way for you to like put some of those examples maybe into something that we can use, you know, as like maybe talking points or like a Q&A or even potentially, because I think that's so valuable, or even potentially something like scenarios that you know of about like, you know, hey, they do sit here in Bandon, and so you're talking about like, what is it, over by the dunes or something? So
What do you hear from Bandon about the response time?
Usually about 30 to 40 minutes.
And they have a station in Bandon. 30 to 40 minutes for Bandon when they have their substation in Bandon.
Just to be clear, that fact is very important.
Yeah.
To talk language that supposes this is what we hear or this is what we experience. So the facts are really important, because otherwise, if we don't stay to the facts and we get caught in the weeds, you end up disparaging an agency, and then you end up with legal things and stuff like that. So we have to make sure we stay with the facts, because these are local agencies that we still partner with.
So,
People, I know the owners, like, that's a great entity,
Yeah.
but they have to do what they have to do.
so I have heard of cases that were 30 to 40 minutes wait time for the ambulance from other chiefs. A great example of what you were just explaining, there was a day, probably a couple of years ago, that both of our ambulances were out, both of Myrtle Point's ambulances were out, and we had a 5th call. And the response time for us to get there was going to be a while because our ambulances were dealing with other emergencies. The person was capable enough that I was able to put them in my command vehicle and drive them to the hospital. Like, we make do with what we have, but at times even we are getting stretched thin. Bay Cities is getting stretched thin. Myrtle Point, that is us with 2 ambulances in this area. Having 1 ambulance in this area, like, usually when they tap out, it's 2 to 3 calls at the same time, a lot of times. Not every time, but there's definitely days that we've got ambulances going every which way, and it's hard to keep up with us having this service here with 2 ambulances and full-time staff.
And for that matter, the secondary crashes. You have a major crash out here on 42, just outside of town, and then you're coming around a corner, and all of a sudden everybody's stopping real fast. That second crash happens, and you got 1 ambulance to deal with it, and now you're waiting for outside resources. Ours, We responded to it, hey, guys, we got another one. You rally that second one, and our people are taken care of. You know, it's just, time and time again, it's just not going to be beneficial for us.
I'm gonna claim dead horse. And if we're ready, we'll adjourn the meeting. Are we agreeing a work session, so we'll post a work session at 6:30?
I'm curious if we might need it a little sooner, like maybe 6:15.
It's next Monday.
Yeah.
Oh, like 6:15? Let's do 6:15.
Yeah, just because I want,
Yep, I'm fine.
I
Are you
think
guys
we're gonna
fine?
continue to spend a little bit on,
Yeah.
you know, how to go forward, and we also don't have two people here that I feel like I would like a little bit more padded time.
Okay, 6:15. 6:15, March 3rd. 6:15 work session, public work session, and then our regular public meeting at 7 o'clock. Are we ready to adjourn? Anything else? Okay, I'm going to adjourn our meeting, 8:32. Thank you, counselors. Thank you, staff.